knowledge, politics, and indoctrination. We have two presenters, one of whom is here, Professor Elizabeth Rata, and she is going to be speaking first on epistemic knowledge and democratic politics. And the second speaker, who I don't know if he's here, he can identify himself if he is. Are you here? And that person will be Manuel Amodo, and he will be talking on the analytic tradition and the distinction between education and indoctrination. So, Professor Rata, you would be first. You would have until, until 5. Hold on. Yep. And then we'll take questions right now.
Right.
Okay. Now we have one wrinkle here, and that is that since the second of the two people who were going to be in the main hall will not be attending or will not be presenting, that when Professor Rata is finished and the question session for her is over, Professor Amodo will be kindly asking him and all of us to move to the other hall. So we just have the one presentation here. And that's because they want the grand finale to be over in the great hall here. Okay? So, Sarah.
Oh, thank you all very much for coming to this, the final session. Now, my concern is a central question in the sociology of education, and it is this: how is it that education systems in democracies tends to produce intergenerational inequality? As we know, elites do extremely well. The middle class tends to hold its own. The working class, the poor and marginalised groups do not. Now, this is despite the best intentions of hard-working and committed teachers and national systems that promote education as the way for individuals to improve their life chances. Now, in recent years, this concern has led me to a research program. It's loosely labelled Social Realism. It's been initiated largely by sociologists of education, but with a central concern that comes from the philosophy of education, that is, knowledge. I consider that the involvement of both philosophy and sociology of education will make the research program, the social realist research program, one that Lakatos would refer to as generative science. I certainly hope so. Now, both disciplines alert us to the contradictions structured into modern national education systems and to their operation in educational policy and practice. Now, it is in tracing these contradictions to their causes in the strife of the dialectic, Immanuel Kant's a vivid phrase, that I consider philosophy joins the sociological project in seeking to understand why national systems and educational systems, despite the intention of promoting greater social equality, appear to contribute to producing inequality. Along with its understanding of political theory, the philosophy of education also provides insights into the type of knowledge that is created in the disciplines of the arts, sciences, humanities, and social sciences. At the point where that disciplinary knowledge is altered for teaching in schools and colleges, the philosophy of education's epistemological work and the interests of the sociology of education intersect. The purpose of the Social Realism research program is to draw on these disciplinary contributions in order to develop a theory of knowledge for curriculum and pedagogy. I mean, a very ambitious project, but that's what we're all about. You know, we want to know more. And so this is the driving force of that, of people who have, as I said, loosely joined together under this umbrella, social realism. So the central questions are these. What should be taught in early childhood centres, schools, colleges and universities? Who authorises the national curriculum and for what purpose? How prescriptive should a curriculum be in terms of the academic subjects, concepts and content? How should it be taught so that all students have equal access to this powerful knowledge? And how should this pedagogy be resourced? I mean, they're the huge questions that concern us all. Educational sociologists, including ones like Michael Young, Rob Moore, and I just want to express here my deep sadness at Rob Moore's death last week. Johann Muller introduced into the discipline ideas informed by the work of Basil Bernstein, Emil Durkheim and Vygotsky. From Moore have come influential writings about the social location of knowledge, but acknowledging its transcendent and emergent qualities. And that's a really important point, that recognising that while knowledge is created by communities of intellectuals who are socially and historically located, it becomes separated from those circumstances. Young and Muller are equally insistent on the social historical location of knowledge and draw on Durkheim in finding those transcendent and emergent properties in the specialised and differentiated nature of epistemic knowledge. And the writers draw on Bernstein for the focus on the structure of knowledge. So this symposium has been particularly interesting for me because my interest has increasingly become into that area of the structure of knowledge. Bernstein, as some of you will know, refers to the vertical structuring of context-independent subjects such as mathematics and science, and describes subjects such as the languages and history as having a more context-dependent or horizontal structure, which of course leads to all sorts of huge and fascinating questions about the extent of their objective nature. The degree of context dependence and context independence affects how academic subjects are altered. This is a really important point. Altered, or as Bernstein would say, recontextualized for teaching at school. That probably is the great pedagogic project, that recontextualizing of subjects for teaching at schools. The way in which the knowledge is altered and the pedagogical implications are of central interest to the social realist program. Number of researchers are engaging in empirical work in the classroom in order to try and understand this process of alteration and the pedagogic implications more closely. In my own faculty at the University of Auckland, I have several colleagues who belong to the Knowledge and Educational Research Unit, or KERU, which I direct. These people are deeply engaged in the problem. One of my colleagues, Graham McPhail, is looking at the music curriculum, and of course music is very much a horizontal subject in Bernstein's terms, so his work is fascinating. Barbara Orman, focusing on history, John Morgan, who works in the geography area, and we also have a number of postgraduate students who are undertaking research into mathematics, science, and the early childhood curriculum, all looking at this central question of the altering or the recontextualizing of knowledge and what that means for pedagogy. My own interest is in the broader politics of knowledge, in particular which groups have access to academic knowledge, as well as the way in which national curricula have the potential to promote collective representations that support a progressive society. and contribute to breaking down the sectarian and primordial groupings of race, caste and religion. And that huge area of what are these collective representations is something I'll come back to a little bit later in the talk. Social realism is a term in the sociology of education, first appears in Johann Muller's book, his 2000 book, Reclaiming Knowledge. The same idea, but from a different approach, is in philosopher of education Chris Winch's concept of epistemic assent. So it was great to meet Chris at the symposium because I have been enormously influenced by his paper. It's an idea that has emerged fully fledged for curriculum purposes as powerful knowledge in Michael Young's and Johann Muller's recent writings. Now, many of these ideas are coming together in a book that I've been privileged to edit with Brian Barrett, Knowledge in the Curriculum, International Studies and Social Realism, which is currently in production. Now, there's a very long history in philosophy about the nature of knowledge, and here we may appear to be newcomers moving into the field. What do we know? So I don't want to fall into what Johann Muller talks about as the incorrigible presentism after Merton, by suggesting that social realism as a research program has emerged fully grown without deep and difficult engagement with previous writers. I'm a bit concerned about time for this talk because we started late, so I'm just going to do a quick move across the next paragraph, except to just note that philosophers of education might say, you sociologists have spent all your time going down side roads into relativism and standpoint theory and Marxism into all sorts of things. I accept an implicit criticism that is probably justified. So be that as it may, it is the concern of the social realist program that knowledge should be a central concern to at least some in the sociology of education. And so what we are asking are these questions. What should be taught at school? How should it be taught? And going further on, what are the consequences of the understanding of the types of knowledge to be included in the curriculum, and for who has access to that knowledge? So this question of access keeps us tied to that central problem in the sociology of education. And that takes me directly to the politics of knowledge, which is probably more the area I'm most comfortable with, and I'll turn to that now. I want to talk about the contradictions in national education systems and in policy that end up in this unequal access. The modern period is characterized by what Immanuel Kant has called the strife of the dialectic. In the political sphere, we see contradictions shaping the three structuring components of the modern nation. That polity itself, the nation, is a contradiction. The concept nation is both the symbol of a population that does not share a common past, but needs a history upon which to build the representations of its new collectivity. These are the source of the modern nation's stability, in that they provide the symbolic cement to bind a disparate population. And of course, who am I to in an Indian context, to say this? This is something that for Indian educators is one of the great concerns, how to bind a disparate population. Pluralities of meaning upon which to base the new collective representations of the modern nation are a central feature of all modern societies. It's the transformation from the sacred to the secular, with its new and multiple ways of giving meaning, that marks the deeper transformation from the traditional to the modern world. And I would just add an aside there that the development of many neo-traditional movements don't take away the fact that we have, as a global world, made that huge and disruptive move from the traditional to the modern. The second structuring component of the modern nation is the state. Now, it too has a contradictory character. It is the democratic nation's infrastructure, and it is simultaneously the capitalist state. It pulls towards equality, it pulls towards inequality. Likewise, the third structuring component, the citizen, is a contradictory status. It is the concept of the equal political and legal entity, yet the materiality of that status in the individual is the unequal worker in the capitalist economy. These structural contradictions in the foundations of modern systems enable the doubt, the restlessness, and the peaceful dispute that characterize democracy. Crucially, epistemic knowledge is similarly structured, a shared feature which aligns it with democracy as two of a kind. Both democratic systems and epistemic knowledge are structured by systems of meaning which integrate principles and concepts, and by the dialectic which characterizes this type of thinking. This was something that Kant recognized when he referred to the strife of the dialectic being the necessity of reason and of politics. The contradictory structure of epistemic knowledge accounts for its counterintuitive character. This type of knowledge seeks what is not known to our common sense, using concepts that themselves do not originate in the empirically known world of appearances. A polity like democracy, because it too is structured by contradictions, also benefits from a counterintuitive approach to understanding its workings. Such an approach is more likely to reveal the unseen interests of opposing groups at work. A common sense approach to politics, however, on the other hand, is more likely to support ideologies. Kant was aware, and I quote from him, of our propensity to give expression only to received opinions, and he noted the gap between common sense and conceptual reasoning when he called it, and I quote, absurd to expect to be enlightened by reason, and at the same time to prescribe to it what side of the question it must adopt. In addition to a shared structuring dialectic, democratic politics and epistemic knowledge share the principle of conceptual reasoning as the means with which to give meaning to human experience. This is in contrast to traditional societies where meaning is drawn from experience. Now, I'll give you some examples, otherwise I think you'll jump on me for having said that. An example in the political sphere, citizenship is an abstract concept of political status. Now this can be contrasted with kinship in traditional societies, which regulates the status of social relations that are known empirically. And of course, citizenship is not known empirically, it's an abstract concept. Similarly, epistemic or rational knowledge is, to draw once again upon the formidable insights of Kant, and to quote, based either on concepts or on the construction of concepts. and a comparison with the traditional world. Just as the traditional world draws on the experience of kinship as the principle of political relations, so too in the sphere of knowledge, conceptions of the world are invested with meaning and value drawn from the experience of the community. Now, in contrast, the faculty of reason strives to attain, and I'm quoting from Kant, epistemic knowledge, and back to Kant, independently of all experience. Epistemic knowledge and democratic politics have another feature in common. Both use the same procedures of doubt and critique to test ideas. In the case of knowledge, and to critique policies and politicians in the case of politics. Indeed, the words that Kant used in describing the task of disciplinary systems are the same terms we use today for political institutions. He spoke of mental legislation under the domination of a discipline, constituting a system of thorough examinations and testing, with such criticism deciding all questions according to the fundamental laws of its own institution, and that secures to us the peace of law and order. Both systems insist on accountability to those procedures of critique. The abstract, objective, rational knowledge produced in the universities and research institutes and reproduced in schools creates the modern rationalized and secularized sensibility upon which democratic society depends. Each sustains the other. In this way, epistemic knowledge and the politics of the progressive world are similarly structured and operated. Therefore, it is unsurprising that national education systems based upon the socialization of children into epistemic knowledge have developed in democratic systems. Yet, there exists in the education system a contradiction that itself tests democracy's ideals. It is a contradiction revealed by the intergenerational pattern of unequal achievement distribution. The working class, the poor and marginalised groups are often excluded from the epistemic knowledge resource that enables individuals to acquire power over their understanding of the world and subsequently of their place within it. Now I'm just going to check. I've lost the order of my slides. I think I'm right. Right. We'll catch up to that one. Critical sociology locates the intergenerational inequalities of educational reproduction in the mental manual division of the capitalist system. And despite the belief that we live in a more benign and liberating knowledge age, the transfer of that mental manual division to the new technological forces and relations of production in the current we've transferred that mental manual division to the new technological forces and relations of production in the current economic era. Despite hopes that technology would be the means to greater equality, the mental manual divide seems as fixed now as it was in the industrial period of industrial capitalism, which of course is still the situation in many countries in the world. Mundane, low-level technology jobs have the same class-determining features of manual work. The jobs in technology may well be cleaner and less physical, but they have the central features of working-class employment: low autonomy, limited or no decision-making, repetitive operation, low wages, casualised employment conditions. In contrast, the mental jobs are like those of the industrial economies, marked by creativity, considerable employee autonomy and decision-making, and high salaries with relative security. For education, the ongoing problem remains how to use the education system to increase equality. A nation that does not reduce inequality and strive for greater equality cannot sustain its democratic polity. Technology alone is not liberating. Indeed, advanced technology combined with restricted politics is a reactionary modernism, Jeffrey Hirsch's term. It is a highly developed economy, a technologically educated workforce, and a repressive political system. This system is in the end self-defeating. The creativity required for the economy has its source in the strife of the dialectic, and I've outlined how that strife operates in the two distinct but interdependent systems: democratic politics and epistemic knowledge. I've talked about how education systems reproduce inequality, but they are also the source of greater equality. One way to achieve greater equality has been to increase access. The question is, access to what? Increasing opportunity to attend school or university is not enough. They may be schools and higher education institutions that simply produce the new manual workers of financial capitalism, their working class status disguised in the digital utopianism of future knowledge age rhetoric. The opportunity for individual advancement and for society's cohesion and stability depends upon, I would argue, access to epistemic knowledge. In recent writings that I've referred to, Michael Young and Ewan Muller refer to this as the powerful knowledge, it's the term they use, and argue for such knowledge to be a curriculum principle. But providing powerful knowledge itself at school is not enough. It must be taught in such a way that students from the working class, the poor, and the marginalised can acquire this knowledge too. So the next part of my talk is about what makes up this powerful knowledge, what is it, and what is it when it is altered to be taught at all levels of school, from early childhood through to vocational programs and university study. And the final section is the pedagogical dilemma. How is epistemic knowledge to be taught, and with what consequences? Epistemic knowledge is knowledge that comes from thought, not from experience. I feel quite in a philosophy of education symposium to make that bold statement. I think I'll move on quickly. I need to justify it. It is conceptual, it's abstract, objective, fallible, and counterintuitive. It's the justified belief of the disciplines, always open to doubt, criticism, and change. It does, and here I hope I have addressed your unspoken critique. It does have a relationship with the empirical world, but only in that idealized models may explain the physical and social world, or may not, as the case may be. The understanding of powerful knowledge in the sociology of education derives from Durkheim's idea of differentiated and specialized knowledge. Despite the differentiation of epistemic knowledge from experiential knowledge, the former is still understood to be developed in social conditions, and I referred to that at the beginning of the talk. It becomes differentiated from those conditions through the emergent and objective properties. Now I'm going to miss the next couple of paragraphs because time's moving on, and I've already alluded to that notion of the transcendent quality of knowledge moving from its socio-historical conditions of production. Differentiated and specialised knowledge is not produced in our everyday lives. We do not acquire it at home and in the community, except if we're middle class, and then we do get quite a bit. From those institutions we acquire an equally important knowledge, but it is the knowledge of the everyday. It is the common sense knowledge that enables everyday life to carry on. Now, schools matter so much because they provide a different type of knowledge that is not based on experience, that is not the common sense understanding of the world of experience. What schools provide, or should provide, is specialised epistemic knowledge. If such knowledge is not provided at school, where else will children, especially those from the working class, acquire this knowledge? The problem for education is to ensure that children from the working class and marginalised groups do acquire the knowledge. But how does a child acquire what Bernard Chillo referred to as the identity of the epistemic self? This epistemic self is developed where, in Michael Young's words, the school is treated as an object of thought, not as a place of experience. Epistemic knowledge is built cumulatively through processes of sequencing, pacing, and evaluation of a subject's concepts. I've taken this from Basil Bernstein. I would like to say more about those pedagogical steps, but I don't have time. But Rob Moore's recent book on Bernstein is certainly a very accessible way of moving into this understanding. It holds to the counterintuitive view that we learn by acquiring context-independent meanings. This is the uncommon sense knowledge that comes from academic concepts and content and can be taught at early childhood level right through to advanced study. It should underpin vocational education so that those students also know and base their work on abstract concepts that explain their practices. In this way, we learn to construct mental objects and how they connect in non-empirical space and time. It's the opposite view, opposite approach from the common sense view that learning starts from experience. Now that's quite a claim to make, so I'll just repeat that. It's the opposite approach from the common sense view that learning starts from experience. This does not mean that the real world of experience is abandoned. I mean, that would be foolish to say. No, the conceptual learning is supported by referring to examples from the empirical world. Now, remember, I'm talking about epistemic knowledge, not everyday knowledge, which of course is learned in the everyday world. This movement from context-independent to context-dependent knowledge is a useful pedagogic device in that it may motivate the student by providing illustrations of the mental construct. It is difficult for students and for many teachers to grasp that concepts are material abstractions in their own right. Popper's, for those of you who know Karl Popper's work, this is the idea of his third worlds. The common sense view that we proceed from the known to the unknown leads to pedagogies that use skills, competencies and outcomes, yet these are often empty of the conceptual models that are the content of academic subjects. In sticking with the known, Students remain in their home identities as the empirical self. The pedagogical dilemma is this, and it's huge. Schools introduce children to a formal world of objective, systematic concepts that are real, but are not real as in the experience real. Rob Moore uses the Bernsteinian term interruption to refer to the move from the world of experience to the world of the not experienced. It is indeed an interruption and may cause disturbance and resistance as students encounter the counterintuitive and resist its uncommon senseness. The change required of students is so profound that we can refer to a new identity being created, that of the epistemic self. No wonder the pedagogic challenge for teachers is so great. Thinking about what is not encountered in experience by using concepts that themselves are not known in experience is without doubt a real interruption to a child's identity. Social realists do not underestimate the pedagogical difficulty faced by teachers in imposing this interruption, especially upon students from the working class and marginalised groups, but that is not a sufficient reason for it not to occur. Marxists, including Lenin and Gramsci, share with liberal humanists the recognition that the purpose of schooling is intellectual liberation. The pedagogic dilemma is finding teaching methods that link working class children with, and I quote from Charles Bailey, historically evolved, universalistic, liberating, humanist cultures. For this reason, pedagogy is as much part of the social realist research program as is the interest in knowledge in the curriculum. However difficult the access to conceptual knowledge, it is this knowledge that has power. It takes the student into an intellectual world where they can think the unthinkable and imagine the impossible, to quote Bernstein. It is this intellectual freedom that is required for political freedom. A system that allows for such freedom is not enough. People must know how to use it. They must have a political identity that matches their epistemic identity, that of a person who can think conceptually in order to doubt, to criticize, and to judge. From reasoning comes the politics of human rights, human equality, human dignity. These concepts are not justified by what we experience. In fact, the opposite could be the case. Often they are counterintuitive to our experience. There are many people in the world who have never experienced human rights or equality or dignity. So they are counterintuitive to the experience of those groups, yet they have the potential to unlock us from an experiential world, often bounded by race, by religion and caste. What is demanded of us is the willingness to live in the contradictions of the strife of the dialectic in both our intellectual and our political lives. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Rata. I would take the opportunity to ask the first question if I could. It has to do epistemic knowledge. Is that a case for abstraction? Isn't that a case for abstraction in the curriculum?
I certainly am referring of mathematics that must actually be taught. Now, do you say, let's use in order to teach the child those early mathematical concepts. Let's use the resources that the child is familiar with. The stones on the riverbank probably make sense. I wonder, and this is just purely a question I've been asking myself, if we use too much of the child's own experience, are we creating a block for that child? Are we stopping the interruption that has to happen in the movement from the empirical to the epistemic? That's just it's a question I'm asking myself, because the stones could remain stones in that child's mind and not become numbers, not become symbols of numbers. How does a child move to the conceptual by grasping the symbolic value of the material? So I've no answer for you except to say that that's a question I ask myself.
Just one last one. Sylvia Scribner, and they talk about context. And so part of it might be, how do you help the tribe to make transfer between what is his or her experience in the riverbank and transfer that to something else to which you want to move the child. So some sort of conceptual transfer from the one instance.
Is that what teaching is? Is that the essence of teaching? That is the moment when you take the child into the world of symbolic consciousness, where whether it's language, whether it's numbers, that the child grasps that those stones are stones that mean.
Okay, let's start with you, and then when you roll it, and then yeah. Okay.
Oh, can I just take one at a time?
That's the one. Yes. That's the one person, and maybe one question, not multiple. And then if the time we come back,
okay.
And so on, yeah.
Okay, ma'am, I'm Kuldeep, and I don't know why, but I just wanted to understand this, that you have added one auxiliary qualifier, epistemic knowledge. So, as far as my understanding is concerned, so knowledge is always an epistemic entity. So, is there some specific reason behind this additional adjective? So this was my one question. If you allow me, so I can ask another question. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Can I answer that one first before I get mixed up? I differentiate between everyday knowledge, doxic knowledge, embodied knowledge, folk knowledge, and so on, and epistemic knowledge. And I use the term epistemic. I chose that very carefully because there are a number of other words I could have used, academic, conceptual, and so on. I chose epistemic because I liked Chris Winch's notion of ascent, and it's in Bernstein too, the idea of the lower order to the higher order, the idea of the verticality and the structuring of the knowledge, and the problem we get with subjects like, say, music or history that don't have that nice vertical structure that we get with maths and the sciences. So yes, I use the term epistemic for that reason, to suggest knowledge structuring and its pedagogical implications, because if knowledge is structured, then when we teach it, we would need to have an understanding of its structure in order to recontextualize it for the classroom, so that we maintain it as a system of meaning, but we start with the lesser order idea. And the wonderful session yesterday about the white lie would fit very well into the notion of teaching epistemic knowledge, I think, because you can't teach all of it at once. You have to, as Bernstein says, sequence it, you pace it, and so on.
Okay, Rohit.
Yeah, two of your premises seem to come to a conclusion. I just would like to know whether you would agree with that. You are saying that intellectual liberation leads to political liberation. Intellectual liberation leads to political liberation, and intellectual liberation can come only through reasoning. If we put these two together and look at the widespread present-day crusade against reason in the name of equality and justice, then perhaps this crusade is going to be counterproductive.
Yes, reason certainly has a very bad press at the moment. I would speak for it. The idea of reason being that one self-critiques, that one looks at the logic of one's thought, sees systems of meaning, that reason is not what comes from what we experience individually, but reason is something that can be universalized. Is that wonderful quote from Pierre Bourdieu when he talks about an 18-year-old mathematician can carry 18 centuries of mathematics in his head. It's that universality of reasoning once it is abstracted from experience. So yes, I realise that I'm probably a minority voice.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing class question to the fore. I mean, the way you have problematized the manual and intellectual labor in the study of education, that will help us in building educational theory. You were quite critical of intuitive knowledge and experiential knowledge. I would like to understand, because in Indian conditions, if child were to be sensitized to the question of class, caste, regional disparities, experience seems to be a wealth. In the constructivist pedagogy and in the radical pedagogy, experience is considered a very wealthy source to conceptualize. So in the Indian condition, I think for the proper contextualization, experience is a richer source to counter disparities.
Yes, no, thank you. Yes, I would agree, but I would say that first one must, in order to understand one's experience as a classed person or a caste person or as a tribal person or a gendered person, one must have the concept of those ideas. And if there's a universalizing process to it, because if you approach your experience using concepts, you realize that it is not your experience alone, that it is the experience of others who are like you, and not just in one place and one time, but you can locate yourself historically as well as globally.
Until now I felt I was able to appreciate your arguments, but now I'm beginning to find a problem, because I feel this assumes that the intellectual resources required to intellectualize your condition is not available with the working class, and that it must essentially come from elsewhere. And I think this is a problem, because in fact we find very sophisticated formulations of the predicament of the social class, including modes of social action which will liberate within the class itself. And so I would say the experience and the existing vocabulary is equally powerful. It's just that it's not legitimate and official. And this I feel is a problem which should be acknowledged and somehow factored into how you position this idea of conceptual knowledge. But my question was actually a little different from this thought which was provoked by your last statement.
Do you mind if I respond to your thought first before I lose it? It's such an important idea. This is why at the beginning of the talk I talked about how ideology is more likely to come from common sense understanding of the world, and the importance of a conceptual understanding is much more likely to lead to a critical democratic person. So that would be my comment to your comment, but please, your question.
My question is, I was thinking of it as the learning of conceptual knowledge is probably not adequate. We need to factor in also the community of practice of that conceptual knowledge as well as access to it and participation in it as equally that which enables the learning and in a way even enables the empowerment through the learning. So if we are only looking at the object as conceptual knowledge, then it's probably not adequate. It never was sufficient even for the middle class who seem to have that knowledge, and it won't be sufficient as we formulate.
Is insufficient.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And I know at one point I mentioned the importance of vocational education including conceptual knowledge. When I talk about conceptual knowledge, I don't mean some pure idea that has no relation to what people do. No, of course, it must inform it is what must inform our practice for us to be able to understand our practice.
Yes.
Actually, I just wanted to share my happiness because probably for the first time I am hearing a sociology, a topic within the sociology of education which gets the pedagogy as well as psychology right. So in fact what you are posing this as a sociological necessity in some sense, but it is also a psychological as well as pedagogical necessity. So the route you are kind of proposing is also both a psychological as well as pedagogical necessity, at least clearly in the case of science education. But as the questions in the end suggest, probably it will be difficult to sustain in sociology or other disciplines. But thank you very much.
It's lovely to hear you say that. Can I recommend you to the work of Johann Muller, where he talks about identity, pedagogic identity. I think you'll find that fascinating because it brings together sociology, psychology, into pedagogy, into how do we look at these pedagogical questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Fuller.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. I certainly recognise the egalitarian enthusiasm, but isn't there a possibility that your arguments can be taken to justify a deeply conservative conception of knowledge? One that's actually likely to be extremely taken up in a sympathetic way by neoconservative thinkers. Michael Young has become the darling of the right in the UK, precisely because he's advocating these views that actually seem to have an extremely conventional and traditional conception of what knowledge is and the relationship between working class kids and that knowledge.
I'm very pleased that you brought that up, John, because it is a real problem for the social realism research project. Michael Young is horrified to find that he has been misunderstood so completely. And that's why I think we have got to look more closely at pedagogy, rather than concentrate simply on epistemic knowledge, because as soon as you do that, then it can be taken up as, oh, this is privileged knowledge. This is the traditional canon. So you're absolutely right And now I know with my own students, they're working in classrooms looking at what pedagogy is associated with the sort of knowledge that makes it available to all children. Because why should some children not have academic knowledge? I mean, that's still a valid question. And it's one that can be asked enthusiastically too.
But why can't experiential knowledge be academic knowledge? I mean, why?
Have I got time to
the
answer that?
The child playing on the riverbank, why can't that be made powerful academic?
Well, there are two different types of knowledge. One is intuitive, the other counterintuitive. I mean, if one looks across outside and says, "Oh yes, the Earth's obviously flat. I can see it's flat. My common sense tells me it's flat." Counterintuitive knowledge is the type of knowledge that takes us beyond the senses, beyond appearances. Karl Popper's work on this is fascinating. He talks about three worlds, and his third world is one of the concept, where the concept itself is real, and it's real because it has it has causation. You can see cause and effect as a result of that, the idea. So it's not a split between mind and matter. It's more what Robert Noller, for example, talks about best fit between the empirical and the epistemic world. Not an exact correspondence, but we can use one thing to. If you take gravitational waves, for example, it was only last month that the empirical evidence was found that proved that the idea of gravitational waves, which Einstein talked about 100 years ago, was in fact something that could be established empirically. So I quite like that idea of sort of a best fit, rather than feeling one has to bring together the empirical and the epistemic as though the truth resides in that equal correspondence, and of course it doesn't.
So you get a chance for that second.
Okay. So it's regarding your use of this phrase, powerful knowledge. Actually, in sociology, the power and knowledge and the power embedded in knowledge is recognized by the association of social forces which are impacting it, and by raising this question that whose knowledge is this and whose knowledge is being transacted in a school. But here in your case, you have recognized power in knowledge by the identification of its function, for example, which help to go beyond the experiences, which help to think which is unthinkable, as you have articulated. So in sociology, on the one hand, we recognize power by identifying the social forces and economic forces, but in your case you have identified this power in the functions of knowledge. So why this the sort of different treatment as far as the tradition of sociology of knowledge, sociology of education is concerned?
I think the reason is connected to John's question. It's an attempt to say that here is a type of knowledge that doesn't just belong to one group of people, the knowledge of the powerful. It's a way of saying this is powerful knowledge that can belong to everyone. I think there's an attempt to do that with the dualism, with that phrase, so that powerful knowledge, if one has it, one is able to think about oneself, one's world, one is knowledgeable.
Okay, thank you, very much, Professor Rata. That's good. Okay, go ahead.
The second speaker of this session is waiting for us in the other hall. So let us go. Let us go to the other hall and yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
The seminar here, thanks to them, and many of the students of Azim Premji University, past and present, they have again worked in the background to make the seminar a success in spite of looming deadlines of their own, including assignments. This is the end of semester, so thanks to all of them. Now, a seminar like this has to march on many fronts. The facilities, the food, right? Like an army, a seminar like this marches on its stomach. So, as someone who experienced the lunch for all 3 days, and I'm sure that's true of the breakfast, and food has been good, and the people who made all this possible are the members of the facilities team in Azim Premji University, especially Velu, Dattatri, Firdoz and Victor. I would like to thank all of them by name, individually and together, for having made this such an enjoyable experience. The communications and engagement team of the university has again worked in the background to contact, reach out to the general public, and also to keep many of us informed about the proceedings, and we thank all of them. The members of the advisory committee who worked in the background, I'm not sure whether everyone in the organizing group will appreciate all the contribution or a lack of it, because I was one of them, but I assume that they all contributed significantly, and the organizers would like to thank all of them. The faculty and students of the Manipal University who collaborated and helped lead the summer school, which is in a way a pre-extension of this conference, thanks to all the faculty and students there. Now, overall, again, this has been a very significant experience, and I'm very glad that this particular seminar has gone so well. And my own job, for some reason, the schedule mentions 20 minutes for this vote of thanks. I managed to do it in far, far less time. I'm sure all of you are very thankful for that, so am I.